My name is Nancy Heller, and my story is called The Journey. For the past 30 years, I've been traveling to Phoenix, Arizona to visit my parents. They moved out there when I was about 19 from Wisconsin. Those early years when I was in college, I think of as the great escape. I escaped the cold of the Midwest and the cold of the East Coast to a desert oasis. I would read and swim and rest, and they were wonderful memories. The next phase of travel to Arizona I call New Beginnings. It was 1991, and I took Roger to meet the family. Roger and I had met 2 months beforehand in the laundry room of our apartment building. The journey went quite well. It was a wonderful visit, which was great because unbeknownst to anyone else, Roger and I were already engaged. When we went back the next year, we were married, and my nieces and nephews inquired, typical question, when there would be new cousins for them. Well, it took a few years, but about 5 years later, Karen was born. And as uptight first-time parents, we weren't about ready to get on that 5-hour journey with an infant. No, we waited. We waited about a year, and I remember getting ready to board the plane, but this time we were already exhausted before we got on. There was the car seat, there was the stroller, there was the diaper bag, and I don't ever remember being so loaded down. And we got on, we thought we're ready to rest and settle in, but Karen had other ideas. Karen was an early walker, something we were very proud of as parents. We didn't realize the implications for our flight. We weren't sitting, we were walking. Up and down the aisle. It was a tag team that Roger and I were, and Karen was our baton that was getting passed back and forth. And on the walks up and down the aisle, we'd say hi to the passengers, they'd smile, and occasionally we'd catch the eye of one of those passengers who had older children. They were reading, playing games, drawing, entertaining themselves. And they'd give us that smile saying, "It'll get easier." But it didn't. It got harder. 2 years later, Mark was born. We boarded the plane. Again, we're feeling more confident, this time with an infant, loaded down more than ever, but more experienced. A little less uptight. We're not afraid to give them Benadryl to help them fall asleep and to help with the earaches. We weren't afraid of that. And we managed just fine for a few years. But then our journey changed. And our journey has remained changed. Mark has autism. And there are 2 flights that I will never forget. The first one happened when Mark was 3 years old. We decided we'd fly to Florida for a family vacation. We'd never done that before. And we thought a piece of cake. We've done the 5-hour trip out to Arizona, Florida, 3 hours, 3.5, no problem. We're experienced parents, we get to the airport, but Mark doesn't want to take the Benadryl. So we're like, okay, it's a shorter flight, we'll manage. We get on the plane, we're loaded down with snacks, loaded down with every imaginable toy or book there could possibly be. We settle in, we eat our home-packed lunches, we read. I think I read We're Going on a Bear Hunt at least 1,000,000 times. Then luckily Mark entertained himself, which was rare. He turned over to the window and there was a window shade, and it went up and down and up and down, probably hundreds of times. So things are going pretty well, this is great. Then all of a sudden Mark goes, clap, people looked, didn't think much about it. That's because they didn't know what meant. Mark was nonverbal at the time, and that was the signal for all done. And not all done with the book, and not all done with snacks, all done with the plane ride. It's time for the plane to land. Okay, I'm prepared. I take out the picture story, and I show him the pictures, and I'm pointing, we're not at the airport yet. It's not time to land. Well, that didn't help with a 3-year-old, and instead what ensued was a temper tantrum that lasted from about Virginia to Florida until Mark fell asleep trembling in my arms, and it was time to leave the plane. The next flight took place about 6 years later. And Mark's 9, my daughter at the time is about 12. And Roger has a brilliant idea. We're going to use all those frequent flyer miles from those trips out to Arizona, and we're going to get a first-class upgrade. But this time we're traveling with my mother-in-law. So I remember boarding the plane, and we settled down into our first-class seats, and with that pang of guilt, I watched my mother-in-law walk back to coach. But we settle in and we think it's a long ride, and it starts off quite well. They come with the beverages, they come with the first-class meal, and Mark loves to eat. My daughter's as happy as can be. We finally arrived. We're important people now. We're in first class. And we start playing games, and then we play animal dominoes over and over and over. But then that wonderful thing happens. The rub-eye, where you think your child is going to rest. Okay, so Mark tries to get comfortable, but he's used to spreading across those 3 seats in coach. And in first class, there's that big armrest, and he can't get comfortable. The shoes are off, he's kind of kicking around, and decides it's time to, what else, walk. So we get up, and the people have their seats reclined in front of us. And in first class, they actually go down farther, so it's almost impossible not to bump those seats. So we go out, Mark bumps the seats, and of course the people in front of us give us the evil eye. I've had that before. We get to the aisle, we're walking back and forth, but this time it's faster. Mark's 9, so we're really putting in some mileage here. And I'm staying very close behind, because Mark has developed a very endearing habit that unfortunately exists to this day of squeezing arms or kissing arms. And it's really an affectionate sign of affection. It doesn't really hurt, but he tends to do it right by the armpit. So I'm, terrified that Mark's going to decide he likes someone on the plane is going to do that. So I'm staying very close behind, and finally Mark looks tired, and we get about ready to reach our seats. And we get about to the row behind us in first class, and all of a sudden I think Mark sees something, and he goes to reach out his hand on the gentleman's tray table. And all of a sudden I hear, "Get your son's hand off my tray table." And I turned and I said, "I'm sorry, my son has special needs." And he said, "Well, then keep him away from me." And everything stopped at that moment. I wanted to say so many things, and I don't think any of them came out. I wanted to say, "He's not contagious." I wanted to say, "And who are you, and how could you be so cruel?" But instead, I sat back down next to Mark, tried to take a deep breath, and I needed to escape. But where to? I'm on a plane. Oh, that's right, my mother-in-law is in coach. So I take my purse, I go back to coach, and I sit down. My mother-in-law goes to be with her grandchildren, and I cry, and I cry, and I cry. I go through all of my Kleenex, and I'm looking around, and luckily the woman sitting next to me gets out a pack and hands them to me. I go through those. Then it's time for my daughter to go back on the way to the bathroom, and it's hard to hide the way my face looks. And she's, "Mom, what's wrong?" And the mature 12-year-old she is, with a brown belt in karate, goes, "Who did that to you? I'll punch them." Like, "No, you won't punch them." As cruel as that man was, I never wanted him or his wife to have the pain of having a child with autism. The rest of the flight was rather uneventful. We settled into our routine. We drove to my parents' home. I unpacked. And then that feeling started welling up again, and I needed to escape. And this time was to my parents' pool. And I jumped in the pool, and I swam, and I swam, and I swam. And the tears came down. And as I was swimming, I kept on saying, "Why was this so painful for me? There have been other times. Why was it so painful?" And that question wasn't answered on that swim or the rest that happened throughout that week, maybe even throughout the next year. But I finally had the realization that I wouldn't always be there to protect Mark from the pain in the world. And there would always be people who would see the outside differences and not the inside beauty. So the next week our week came to an end, and we boarded the plane. and we all headed back to Coach, all 5 of us in our row, and the babies were crying, and the kids were kicking the seat behind us, and I felt very much at home. We didn't have first-class meals, but we had my mom's wonderful sandwiches. And Mark was tired and relaxed, and he spread out across our laps and closed his eyes. And I remember looking over at my husband and grabbing his hand and closing my eyes and saying, "I think I'll stick to Coach."